name is Jen Marx, and I am the campus dean for the San Luis Obispo College of Law, which is a branch of the Monterey College of Law. And my background is that I have practiced law in San Luis Obispo County for just about 30 years. So right now, my main interest is in helping the students and the legal community in connecting with each other and doing as much as I can to help create job opportunities and internships. So tonight we have a very interesting topic, which is what is it like to have a career in public interest law? I'm really happy to have two very successful and community-minded participants, Kara Woodruff and Erica Flores Baltodano, who you may know as one of your professors who teaches constitutional law and now voting rights law. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'll be a moderator, but the program is really up to our guests, very successful attorneys who are doing so much to help us make a better world. So with that, I'm going to open up and ask Kara Woodruff first to tell us what your definition of public interest law would be and your participation in that. So what kind of cases or causes do you take on? So Kara.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here tonight. I first just want to say I'm really impressed by all of you. I went to law school 30 years ago, and I know it's really hard, especially for some of you I think are working on top of going to school. It's incredibly challenging to balance that plus your life and everything else. So good for you. I haven't always practiced law in a very traditional way, but I can tell you that it's worth it. In my past 30 years since I became a lawyer, I have never regretted going to law school, and I was someone who really didn't enjoy the experience. Even if you don't particularly practice law, just having that background can be so useful, not only substantively, but I have found that even when I don't know anything about a topic, just people knowing I'm a lawyer, they assume knowledge that I may or may not have. It's just really quite helpful in life. And so I just want to tell you all, as hard as it is, I truly think it's worth it. As far as the question, Jan, what is public interest law? I guess my answer would be, it can be anything you want it to be. It can be very traditional, working for a nonprofit or in some kind of charitable capacity, but it can also be very informal and whatever you choose it to be. So I think Erica's story is going to be more interesting than mine, but what I can tell you is I generally haven't been a, quote, public interest attorney. I've done other things with my time, and I'll tell you about that if you're curious. But what I've done is, with the extra time, I have just pursued my passion for protection and conservation of the natural world and public access. It's something that's just personally very important to me. So I haven't had a job in my whole life doing this, but informally, I pursue opportunities to get involved in conservation. And so that's how I've defined public interest law. And I think it's just as broad as you want it to be.
That's wonderful. Well, let's hear from Erica Baltodano. Yeah, same question, sort of what, how would you define it, and what kind of causes do you represent?
Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and also some new faces. Maybe I'll see some of you this summer in my new voting rights elective class that I'm in the process of preparing for all of you. So you know what, it's funny because Kara said her path was untraditional. I think my path was untraditional. I really don't know that there is any, one definitive path in the law. And I certainly think if you're a parent, it actually also takes turns and twists and all of that as well. So, I think of public interest law as lawyering that is for a cause, and also I strongly associated with lawyering not for profit. So in the context of a public interest organization or pro bono work that you would do, and you're doing work for the public interest to benefit the public, to benefit individuals who might not otherwise have access to traditional legal relationship with an attorney, right? So, so my path was, well, let me back up and say that I went to law school having spent a little bit of time working in a traditional law firm, but and also having spent some time working in the nonprofit context. And I really knew that I wanted to work in a nonprofit legal organization when I went to law school. And so it also really fit my interest to combine my passion for the law and policy and social justice, quite frankly, to develop a career in public interest work. So from law school, I worked, well, while I was in law school, I interned at an organization called the Center for Law in the Public Interest. It was one of the first public interest law firms in the nation. It was originally founded by a few lawyers from a major international law firm that broke off and built this law practice. But while I was there, I started building another nonprofit that spun off and became its own nonprofit organization. And we did legal and policy work in the areas of environmental justice and civil rights. And so that was what my focus was for more than a decade. And this was in the Los Angeles area. But because I was at a nonprofit and I was assistant director and counsel of this nonprofit, where we were doing really innovative work to address equal access to public parks, recreation, schools, and other open space, and basically the early beginnings of what we consider green justice now. I was also wearing a lot of hats, because that's one of the consequences of working in a nonprofit, is that you tend to wear a lot of hats. So I was also doing a lot of law firm management. I used to joke that when someone would call and ask to speak to the communications department, I would say, yes, please hold. This is the communications department. And then if someone would call and ask about, can I speak to, your, I don't know, someone else? And I was, just wearing a lot of hats. That set me up nicely because I met my husband in law school. And so while I was doing public interest work, he was building his own career as an employment attorney. And after about a decade or so, he was interested in starting his own practice, and I had all the skills to run a law firm. So that was around the time that we relocated to the Central Coast here in San Luis Obispo, and we established an employment law practice that, because of my background, because of our shared values, was very social justice oriented, and it was a contingency-based practice. So in my mind, there was a public interest component to it as well, because our clients did not pay us. We only got paid if we settled cases successfully on their behalf.
So let's just hang on there, because I want to go back to Kara.
Yeah.
And the next question is, what was your path to law school? Did you have any mentors? Whatever made you think that you could become an attorney, and sort of what was your path there? And then I'm going to go back to Eric and ask the same question. So yeah, Kara.
I think growing up, I was really passionate about the natural world and outdoors and wildlife and environmental justice before it had that name. And I think along the lines, probably college professors suggested I consider law school. So I think that's probably where I first heard it. Then I applied to law school, got in, and when I was ready to graduate, I applied for hundreds of different jobs in environmental arenas, conservation groups, environmental justice organizations, and I got 0 of those jobs. And so then I had to go end up working for a very large law firm to pay the bills. But I think that answers your question. I had a passion, and I was told early on that the best way to execute some of these visions I had for a better tomorrow was to go to law school and be a lawyer. And I think it was a good path.
Well, thank you. Okay, so Erica, so how did you ever get the idea that you could become an attorney?
Um, I studied sociology and public policy at UCLA, and in doing that work, I grew very interested in the sort of systemic issues of our society and policy as well. And I got a minor in public policy. So um, law school seemed sort of like a natural transition for me. I actually went to law school thinking that I might want to be a judge one day. And then I discovered this whole world of public interest work and realized that I really could combine law and policy and social good as an attorney. So that's the path that I took. I didn't have anyone in my family that was an attorney. I had one cousin actually who had gone to law school, and he, we talked about my interests, and he said, I think you should go to business school. So he was trying to talk me out of going to law school. But it's interesting because one of the things that I ended up doing was running my own law practice and really playing sort of a behind the scenes role in that practice because I liked the business part of it as well. So I ended up doing a little bit of that. And then the mentors I got in the law were more so, once I was actually practicing law. But let me just, one quick story. The idea of being an attorney when I was a little girl, and also maybe being a mother one day, because I thought when I was a little girl, I would grow up and be a mom at some point. The idea of being both an attorney and a mother, it didn't even occur to me until I was very active in scouting. And we had a presentation by a parent at one of the local elementary schools who was an attorney. And it was the first time that I met a mom that I knew, because I knew her to be a mom, who was also an attorney. And it occurred to me, wow, you could do both. And so that was when I was quite young.
That is interesting. Yeah. It didn't occur to me to go to law school until I was actually in charge of graduate student housing at Stanford. And I had to represent the university when they got sued. I mean, people sue, universities, just like suing cities, happens a lot. So I was on the stand and I got to actually be in the courtroom as a witness. And all of a sudden I thought, man, I like this. I like the courtroom. I just suddenly felt this really strong urge to go to law school. I didn't want to just be a witness. I wanted to be a mover and a shaker. So it's interesting how people come to that. And often when I talk with the students, I ask, how did you make that decision to actually come to law school? But tonight we're focusing on really what is it that you appreciate about your practice? And just please tell us more about what you actually do. And Kara, what your present position is. I know you didn't mention it, but your present position and also all the stuff that you've done for environmental concerns as a lawyer and a volunteer. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try not to make this too boring. I guess what I would say, all of you have applied to law school for a reason. And I think most of you come from a position where you had some passion to make the world a better place. I think that's why most people pursue law school. And that was true for me. As I mentioned, when I first graduated from law school, I felt like I had this great credential and I would be hired anywhere. And I found out it was really, really hard to get the job I was looking for in the public interest. So I had to compromise a little bit and took a job at a big law firm. And it was pretty good. The pay is good. It was very challenging intellectually, but I never felt inspired by it. And it didn't feel like I was where I wanted to be, given how hard law school was and the sacrifices that you make to get there and the money you put into the process. So when I started working at this big law firm, I continued to look for jobs in the public interest. And again, I just really didn't have any luck. And I have since learned that these jobs are hard to find because there are a lot of people in law school who want them. But there's only a few positions that actually pay a living wage in the public interest. So I kind of gave up on the idea of public interest law and decided I would just move to the place I wanted to live and prioritize that. So I moved to this area, San Luis Obispo, and took a job for a small law firm. As soon as I moved, I found out there was a vacancy at the local chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and I applied for that job and I eventually got it. So I guess one of my first lessons was if you have an interest in public interest law, you really have to apply to a lot of jobs and keep working at it, because you may not get exactly what you're looking for right away. You may have to send in a lot of applications and get a lot of rejections before you find your place. I then worked for the Nature Conservancy and other conservation groups for a number of years. And then I realized the other problem of public interest law, which most of it just doesn't pay very well. By this time, I had a child, a second one was coming, and I realized I just wasn't going to make ends meet. And so I ended up leaving the nonprofit world and becoming a financial planner for a financial planning firm here in San Luis Obispo, which was it was more able to pay the bills. And yet, although I love this job and I still have it, it wasn't exactly what I was looking for in terms of my interest in the public interest. So then I just started doing things after work on the weekends where I could, in the areas that I was really interested personally. And many of those didn't pay. So I got involved in young foster care advocacy and doing some more conservation projects. And so that's sort of been the rest of my career, which is I have this one job that pays the bills and provides that financial independence, which is so important. And then secondly, with the extra time I could find, I still stayed engaged in those policy issues that were really important to me personally. And then to wrap this up, I would say most recently, probably because of all the public interest work I've done, I got an offer to work for the state senator, John Laird, in this area. And he offered a part-time position where I could look at policy issues, which has really been rewarding and a lot of fun. And this is kind of the job I think I've been waiting for a long time. It finally worked when I sort of gave up on trying to find that perfect public interest job that paid, letting you know I finally get a job kind of where I wanted to be on the side. So all that to say, public interest work is hard to find. It doesn't pay well, but if it's something that you're really passionate about, if you keep trying, you can find a place. And sometimes if it's not your primary job, you can do it on top of some other position that allows you to have some financial independence, which I think is just so critical.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's hear from Erica. Yeah.
So, you know, the end of law school, I went to Berkeley for law school, and they always did a big push for, you know, getting hired at a big firm when you graduated. They're a lot better now about also cultivating public interest attorneys, which is good. But back then, everyone was interviewing to work for a big firm, and all the big firms were hiring. This was before the recession and all of that. And I was really very consistent on wanting to work in the nonprofit sector. So I did find a position as an intern, and I went back for a second internship at the same organization because it was a good fit. And then I was very, very fortunate, because Kara is absolutely right. It is extremely hard to find full-time paid positions in the public interest world, but I did get one as a fellow at the same organization. While I was there, I started working with a senior attorney, within a few years, I became assistant director and counsel at this organization. We started building up this new program called the City Project, working at the intersection of civil rights and environmental justice. So I did that for a while until we relocated to the Central Coast. And at that point, I had two very young kids. I had a 2 and a 4-year-old, or a 1 and a 4-year-old. And we were building this new employment law practice. So the way that I was able to maintain my passion for serving the public was, and also the necessary balance that I needed with young children, was to not play a litigation role in that law practice. Litigation was something that we used as a last resort. We tried to do a lot of policy, advocacy, coalition building, strategic media campaigns, all kinds of different strategies, and really relied on litigation as a last resort only when necessary. But at the employment law practice, we did all litigation. And I played more of a behind the scenes role, running the practice and doing all the other important roles necessary for a law practice. But it allowed me to be engaged with nonprofits as board members. And as my kids got older and older, I was able to do more and more of that. And so I was both working with clients to a certain degree, but also keeping my foot in the nonprofit sector, which was really important to me. So eventually I got very involved with our local San Luis Obispo Legal Assistance Foundation, which is kind of like our SLO County's local legal aid organization. And so having been a staff attorney, an intern, a staff attorney, an assistant director of a nonprofit organization, I'm now a board president of the board of directors of an organization. And so I continue to sort of shape public interest law in our community. SLOLAF serves seniors, veterans, and others that are experiencing issues with housing and what have you. So again, we're serving low-income communities and communities that otherwise would not have access to legal services. So, so I continue my work there in public interest law, and that's just one avenue. I'm also very involved in other education equity endeavors, and in a couple of weeks, I'm presenting at the Smithsonian again on environmental justice issues, because so much of the work that we were doing back in the early 2000s has really become legendary, and we built a framework that continues to be utilized. So I continue to do that work as well.
That's great. So my next question is, if you could talk about some of your recent cases and also your achievements going back in the years so that people can have a sense. I know, Carrie, you're being very modest, but I have followed your career for decades. In fact, I first met you when you were a ranger for the Nature Conservancy, and we just moved to the area and had just been on the dunes for the first time. So I had no idea that we would be able to stay in touch and be friends after all these years. So yeah, tell us about what you've done. I'm thinking of Hearst, I'm thinking of Diablo decommissioning, I'm thinking of what you're doing with Wild Cherry Canyon. I don't have to tell you, you tell us, okay? Yeah.
I've been involved in a lot of different conservation projects, and some of you know exactly what that is, and I find that a lot of people don't know anything about that. So one thing is, it's clear in this world, as you know, we face our 6th extinction event. And there's sort of a cataclysmic loss of wildlife and biodiversity across the globe. And it's pretty well understood that unless we take pretty aggressive actions now, that much of the wildlife that's on the planet just will cease to exist. There's already so many different animals and plants that have become extinct or close to it. So this is something that's just been important to me. And so I've been involved in a lot of different conservation projects, which kind of work like this. You have a landowner who has an important piece of property that is biodiverse, important ecologically, maybe it's an important corridor for wildlife. And then you negotiate the purchase of that property or some form of property interest on that. And you negotiate a price that's based on an agreement between the buyer, which is a conservation group, and the seller, which is the owner of the land. And then you buy that land, and sometimes and oftentimes it becomes available for certain types of public access. So I've been involved in a number of conservation projects in this county, including a conservation project over the Hearst Ranch, which surrounds the Hearst Castle, if you're familiar with that. I've been involved in projects out in the Carrizo Plain. If you've ever been out there, that's in the eastern part of San Luis Obispo County. A lot of projects was within the Irish Hills, which is kind of in the area surrounding the Diablo Canyon power plant, and also in projects down at the Guadalupe Napomo Dunes. Perhaps many of you are familiar with the Oceano Dunes. It's the one place in the state of California where you can presently ride an off-highway vehicle, an OHV, on the sand. And I think this is probably my most recent project, although I've only played a very minor part in this. There are many other parties who are much more active. But this is an interesting case to me, and it's really a perfect example of environmental justice and why I think it was such an important issue. So these dunes are one of the most unique dune complexes on the globe. It's one of the largest dune complex, and it's really a unique area from the perspective of plant and animal species that are found few places beyond the dunes. And for years and years, a large portion of the dunes have been used by off-highway vehicle enthusiasts. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a really enjoyable activity, and people have used this dune area for recreation for many, many years. The only problem is that activity has a lot of unintended consequences. And at the top of the list is that the people that live near the dunes have suffered from very, very poor air quality for decades now, because when you ride these vehicles on the sand, it releases dust into the air. And many times the communities surrounding the dunes experience the worst air quality in the entire nation. That happens many times a year. And it's just not sustainable for the people that live in this community. And the communities that are hardest hit tended to be the most economically disadvantaged communities in the entire county. So people that live in Oceano have been facing really poor air quality. People in Nipomo, people in northern Santa Barbara County, like the city of Guadalupe. The other issue too is that the dune riding absolutely is responsible for multiple deaths of endangered species like the least tern and the snowy plover. Also, if you're adjacent to those communities where the OHVs enter, there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of noise. It just doesn't make for a really pleasant neighborhood experience for many of the people living there. And many of the voices that have complained about this activity have really not been listened to. As you may have heard last month, the Coastal Commission, for the first time ever, has decided that continued OHV use is just not compatible to the people that live nearby and the air quality and the endangered species impact. And so they've called for the phasing out of that type of activity in 3 years, and actually the closure of the Pier Avenue entrance, which is in the Oceano Dunes. So I really support that because I think it's a perfect example of environmental justice. The people that enjoy the dunes aren't the ones who are living there and suffering the consequences. So I thought it was exciting to be a part of that outcome, and also protect some of the areas around it. So that's an example of some of the things I've been up to. It's been really fun and rewarding. And for every gain, there's about 3 losses, but you keep trying.
Well, thank you. So Erica, yeah, will you tell us about your various cases? Sort of, I'm asking for war stories kind of, but also what you're up to now. So yeah, please.
Well, I'm glad Kara mentioned Oceano Dunes, because I'm going to tell a story that will then actually tie right into that. So in the early work at the city project, 2 of our capstone projects was bringing the first state parks to downtown Los Angeles and along the Los Angeles River. These were, this was a 40-acre and a 30-acre region of land that were former rail yards that were going to be developed into warehouses. And the community surrounding the area, disproportionately impoverished, disproportionately Black and brown, really wanted that space for a park. They didn't have any parks in their community. They didn't have places to play. We represented several community organizations, including Anahuac Youth Soccer Association, which was a youth soccer group that was run by an immigrant from Mexico named Raul Macias, who, in order to keep the kids out of trouble in his neighborhood in Northeast LA, would gather them together and help them play soccer. They had balls donated, they had uniforms donated, they had shoes donated, but they literally did not have a place to play. So they would kick around a ball in the parking lot of his silk screening business that he ran. So in any event, that was where we started. That was where we developed all the strategies, diverse coalition building, establishing that, you know, a park is important in and of itself, but it's also important as a matter of civil rights. Because if you looked at the demographics of Los Angeles, we did demographic analysis and we did mapping, GIS mapping, and of course we explored the historical and the legal history of discrimination in Los Angeles. And you could see that Los Angeles as a whole was park poor. There were less parks per resident compared to most other communities in the nation, but it also it was even worse, right? If you were in communities of color and low-income communities, they suffered first and worst. So you had even less access to places to play, places to recreate, places to keep your bodies and your minds healthy, places to connect with nature. So we established these really broad coalitions to support this park proposal, and did a lot of public educating. We had to do we did a lot of policy reports and educating people about how this really boils down to a fairness of equality, right? We can't have communities in wealthier parts of the area that have multiple places to recreate when other communities don't have access to those same resources. So we were pushing the envelope. When we think of environmental justice, we often think of the disproportionate burden of environmental burdens, environmental denigration that that communities of color and low-income communities bear. But what we were looking at is the fact that they also had less than their fair share of environmental benefits. And so that's what we were working on. We developed all these strategies. Courts were involved in some respects. It's a long story, and I won't get into all of it, but because of those two parks, it really spearheaded an urban park movement in Los Angeles and the greening along the Los Angeles River. And we started to apply those lessons to other situations, such as beach access. There were enclaves in Malibu, for example, where homeowners sort of felt like the beach that their homes were up against were their own private beaches, right? And so they were trying to find ways to literally block public access. And of course, in California, our beaches are public. So, we, over time, over many, many years, we were advocating for increased access to our beaches and looking at beaches through the lens of civil rights and environmental justice. So this went on for many years. Robert Garcia, who is the founder of the City Project and was my mentor for so many years. He passed away last year, but many years ago when we were working together, I think this was in 2005, we published an article called Free the Beach. And it was really revolutionary at the time. And it really changed the way we talked about beach access. And over time, the coalition that we built got bigger and bigger. And this coalition representing millions of Californians would go to the Coastal Commission and advocate for more and better policies. Flash forward to 2000, I think it was 18, the California legislature passed legislation to amend the definition of, to amend the Coastal Act to incorporate environmental justice into the things that the Coastal Commission has to consider when it's making land use decisions. And then the Coastal Commission adopted guidelines. Robert Garcia referred to those guidelines as the best, strongest environmental justice language he's ever seen written into any statute by any government agency. So the Coastal Commission was then positioned to make this shift in their policy very recently in the Oceano Dunes situation, because they did rely in part on these new guidelines. They engaged, because they're now required to by statute, they engaged more with the Chumash and other native communities that had been for decades, for years and years pleading, this is sacred land, we're destroying our land, we're destroying the natural space here and the species. But Kara's absolutely right. There were also adverse environmental implications that were predominantly falling on communities of color and the lower income communities surrounding that park space. So, I share that story because it tells you a little bit about the work that I've done. But it also demonstrates that the work in public interest law can really be a long process, right? You have small victories, you have lots of defeats along the way, you celebrate the small victories, some are bigger than others, but they also build upon each other. And so when we wrote Free the Beach, which was eventually, it was published in the Stanford Journal of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, when we wrote that, it was groundbreaking what we were talking about. And now when we talk about, the language has just completely changed. So there's just, it takes time, but when you're talking about long legislative change, policy change, legal changes, they do happen over time, but they require some passion and grit and perseverance along the way.
That's wonderful. Well, I want to go back to Kara, and I have to say, I admire you both so much. I'm really impressed, totally impressed with you, and I consider you both friends. So Kara, but let me just ask you, backing up a little bit about what you were doing on the Diablo Canyon decommissioning committee, I guess it was, and your advocacy for Wild Cherry Canyon. we just have another like probably 4 or 5 minutes until we open up questions from the audience. But yeah, that was another thing that I have to say. I believe your JD degree and being an attorney kind of helped in terms of your credibility in your appointment. So yeah, go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Jan. I'm a member of what they call the Diablo Canyon Decommissioning Engagement Panel, and this is a panel that was set up a few years ago by PG&E. As you may know, PG&E is the utility that operates the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, which is scheduled to close by 2025. So they formed this panel to act as a liaison between the utility and the community of interest, because when this plant closes, it will really impact pretty significantly this region. A lot of head of household jobs are going away. Some of the tax revenue of operating that plant will cease. And then the other big question is, when you close Diablo, what do you do with those 12,000 acres that surround the plant? To this point, they've just been kind of buffer area for plant operations to keep people kind of away from the operations and all the activities they have to support it. But once Diablo closes, those lands will be available. And what a lot of people have been arguing for many years, and in fact, consistent with a public initiative that was on the ballot back in 2000, most people are looking to see that those lands are conserved and made available for public access once the plant closes. So the plant is about, as I mentioned, 12,000 acres. That includes a parcel called Wild Cherry Canyon. That's been the subject of conservation efforts for over 20 years now that have yet to be successful. And those are lands that are pretty close to the town of Avila Beach, between Avila and Port San Luis. So if all goes as planned, we would like to see a future where some of those lands, perhaps a large percentage of them, might ultimately owned by a local tribe. And hopefully those lands will also be subject to conservation easements that will ensure that certain types of development are forever prohibited. And that also will allow for public access, so that, for example, if you were at Avila Beach and you entered at the southern portion, you could walk for some 20 miles through the Irish Hills and end up linking up to Montana de Oro. It would be a really terrific public access trail. Really fun, really enjoyable, could protect the wildlife there, provide a great recreational opportunity for people that live here and visitors, and then also promote the local economy. Tourism and park ownership, public ownership, is just a great way to generate revenues for local hotels and restaurants and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of benefit to that outcome. And I think we'll get there, but it's going to take a lot of time and patience. And if you're ever curious about what our panel is up to, we do have a website. It's just www.diablocanyonpanel.org. And there's a lot of information about the plant, its closure, the impacts, and what about the future of those lands that surround the plant.
Well, that's great. I want to say, as one of your supporters for Wild Cherry Canyon for probably 20 years at least, the fact that Kara, that you've been able to get into the weeds and with your legal expertise actually surface the issues so that the public can relate is really crucial. And I feel that I also want to turn it back over to Erica. I think that's also a huge benefit of people who are interested in actually making the world a better place. Most people, if they know what the issue is, they can possibly engage. But otherwise, it just seems like a big muddy mess and people glaze over. So Erica, yeah, if you could address that, and also tell us about what SLOLAF did with the was it Grand Avenue or Grandview?
Grandview Apartments.
Apartments in Paso. Yeah, so people get a greater sense of what you've done through SLOLAF and what SLOLAF is doing.
You know, I'm really proud of the work that SLOLAF is doing. In the last year or so, SLOLAF has doubled its size in staff, in funding, and in the number of programs that we're able to offer. So the number of clients that we're able to serve. We've been doing a lot more work on the housing front. It's such an incredible need in this community. So SLOLAF recently was able to, or is in the process of handling a class action lawsuit on behalf of residents of an apartment complex in the Paso Robles region. It was very much a slum housing situation. And so they got involved in that and have been helpful in litigating the case to ensure that the residents are fairly compensated, but also when the building was finally inspected, the owners just kind of threw up his hands and said, I'm getting rid of this thing. So the building was put for sale, and all of the residents had to find new housing. And so there were several individual eviction matters that had to be handled as well. So SLOLUP has all been in the process of handling that. So I can't speak into too much detail. I can't remember what's privileged and what's not privileged. And I'm not the lead attorney on that case, but it is making good progress. I will tell you that things are going in a very good direction. But I don't remember what your earlier question was, Jan, but.
Well, go ahead and answer it anyway. Answer whatever question you would like.
Whatever question. I know there was something that I did wanted to address, and I don't quite remember what it was, but let's see. I forget what I was going to say. Ask me a question, or maybe we can go right to questions.
Oh, okay. Well, here's a question. How do you think your having a JD degree and being an attorney has helped your career, your personal development, and in terms of your own life goals?
For me, Jan, the work that I've done has been within the law, so I couldn't have done it without a law degree. But as I think, especially in this community in San Luis Obispo, it's helpful as a professional, as a person of color, to have a degree, to get the seat at the table, to be involved in the decision making, and to play that kind of a role. But my education, as an attorney, I think has also really had a profound impact on my role as a parent. And for several years, I wrote a series of essays called Mommy Esquire, Merging Lessons in the Law with Lessons in Parenting. And they were really focused on issues of race, class, gender, and other sort of social justice issues that were highly relevant to the legal work that I had been doing for so long. But then also the work that I was doing managing a law practice, and then, being a parent, and how do you merge those things, balance those things. And, I often say that being an attorney has tremendously shaped who I am as a parent, because of the advocacy work that I've done and the way that I can sort of educate my children and make them aware of things that I think are just really important to be aware of. But I also think that being a parent has shaped me as an attorney and professionally. And I'm frequently asked by young law students or people that are interested in a career in law, and they wonder, like, can you have it all, right? Can you be a parent? Can you be an attorney? And I think, my response to that is, yeah, you can have it all. I don't know that you can necessarily have it all at the same time. So you do have to make choices and prioritize things and make sacrifices. And so that's something that I have done, that I've done very proudly, and I don't have any regrets about that. So my taking a step back when my kids were younger was something very important to me. And so I think that, in that regard, it's helpful to have a partner who's willing to make sacrifices as well, and to, financially. I mean, it is very realistic that you need to think about what is realistic financially. And when I felt like I wanted to be home more, when we had our first son, my husband at the time had to go from working, also doing civil rights work for a small plaintiff side firm to working for a larger firm. And so he was doing employment law on behalf of employees, and then he started doing employment law on behalf of employers. Had that both of those experiences, but that made it possible for me to take a step back a bit. And then having our practice together also built in some additional balance that we needed when the kids were younger. And so all of that plays a role in any time you're going to have working professionals and children. That's always something to consider, but particularly as a public interest attorney, I think there's so much value, so many lessons, so much about the world and about our community and about our society that you could pass on to your children. But there's also a lot of balance there.
Right. So I'm going to ask you the same question, Karen. How do you feel your JD? You're addressing a bunch of people who are slogging through law school. They're adults. They often have children. They often have full-time jobs in the daytime. So these are people who are really, they're my heroes. They're just working so hard. They're trying to better their own lives and better the world. And so how would you feel that your JD degree in being an attorney has helped you in terms of your career and also in terms of your life?
I think it's been incredible. I mean, I have several regrets in my life, but one of them is not being an attorney. I think it's one of the best decisions I ever made. I mean that sincerely. I think law school and the practice of law made me a better writer. It definitely made me a better reader. I think I've become more logical. I think it improves your thinking. I think having the credential can be very powerful. And I think another aspect is, especially for people who are working, raising a family, and attending law school, law school can be a very humbling experience. To be in this position, you've already been through college. And I don't know about you, but when I graduated from Cal Poly, I thought I was smart. I thought I could write well. I thought I could speak well. I thought I could reason well. And then I went to law school and I felt like I just got blasted. And I was told, not directly, but certainly it was revealed to me that my writing or thinking or argument was less than satisfactory. So I felt like after going through law school, one of the real lessons is I think it teaches you to be quite resilient. It's so important for life because especially in public interest law, you win some, you lose a lot more, and be able to recover from setbacks or from critique or less than perfect outcomes and be able to get back up and fight some more, I think is so essential. And I think law school is perfect training for that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, Erica.
Dan, can I just say something also? I think it's important for students to understand that from the financial perspective, and also to the degree that you're going to stay in the communities where you're going to school, and they are smaller communities, so there's going to be less opportunities for employment in public interest law. I think it's important to just emphasize that you can do public interest work, I mean, the way that Kara has, without having a formal public interest job, right? So that's really important, and that's something that just having a law degree, you know, I'm preparing this class right now on voting rights, and there are so many opportunities as attorneys for us to get involved in just helping people register to vote, helping people with the complex process, lending your skills, you know, just because we're in a digital world, you can help people, voters in other states at this point. So, you know, there's so many ways that you can positively impact our community and do good work, even if you're, you know, working at a private law in a private law practice. You know, there's room for that.
Well, thank you for that perspective. Now, our students at 6:30, they have to start going to law school at night virtually. So we just have a few minutes to take some questions. So I'm going to open it up. Anybody who has a question, just let me know. And how do we do that? I think Dina said you can raise your virtual hand. I'm not quite sure how I see that. But does anybody have any questions at this point?
Benjamin has a question.
Benjamin, okay.
Thank you both for all that information. It's really been great listening. I was wondering, when you've gone throughout your careers, do you feel like your colleagues have had somewhat similar educational and career paths as you? Just coming from a standpoint, I wonder if that we're all wondering this, coming from a more of a regional law school rather than maybe a traditional 3-year one. I was just wondering how you kind of compared throughout your careers.
Okay, Carrick, how can you want to address that?
It's interesting. I don't know if I'm aware of other attorneys where they went to school or whether it was a traditional 3-year program or an after-school program. It's almost like, are you in the club as an attorney or are you not? I mean, I suppose when you apply to certain jobs, you might have to indicate sort of what path you took, but it's almost like if you're an attorney, it kind of doesn't really matter how you got there. Just the fact that you went through the school and then passed the bar is kind of what gives you, I think, that's credential that's so powerful. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I actually went through our SLO County attorney directory with a highlighter and highlighted all of the people who had gone to evening law schools like ours. We were accredited by the California State Bar of the Examiners at this point. And I found it was about 20% of the attorneys practicing, at least the ones who joined the Bar Association. In Monterey County, it's way up. I think it's like 40%. And so the longer that our law school is here in the community, the more we will see practicing attorneys and judges, people who become judges, as alumni of our little branch. But Monterey College of Law has been going on for 50 years. And so they've got the sort of the bench strength to place their people in those positions. What do you think, Erica, about that question?
You know, it's before we were doing virtual schooling, I would frequently speak with high school students, lessons, sort of personal and professional lessons from a public interest attorney. And, you know, one of the things that I always emphasize to the students is that, you know your story, right? Just embrace your story, whatever your story is, whatever those struggles have been, whatever challenges you've overcome. If and know your parents' stories as well, right? Because even if maybe you didn't struggle as much, your parents might have. And know those stories, use those stories, and use those things to your advantage to make you stand out. What do you bring to the table that's unique, that's different? What perspective do you have that's different? And I think that is incredibly important when you're talking about, you know, graduating from a regional law school and wanting to continue to work within the region. I personally think that the law is still very elitist in terms of where you went to law school and hiring and that sort of thing. And so I'm conscious, I'm sensitive to that. But I think that there's ways to overcome that. I think that if you can present yourself, you know, I did a resume workshop recently for our law school. And that was one of the things that I said, there's no reason why your resume cannot look as impressive as a resume from a student who graduated from a traditional law school. And so really it's how you present yourself, the narrative that you tell, how do you tell your story? How do you make yourself stand out? And then just do the highest quality work. You are always representing yourself. Proofread everything. Everything you submit in writing needs to be polished. Everything you post online should be polished because you are selling yourself. And regardless of where your degree is from, people recognize, employers recognize people that have good attitudes, right? I mean, attitude is something that you cannot teach, right? You just have to have it. So good attitudes and individuals with really great work ethics and all of that. So I think that there's things that you can do. Unfortunately, the public interest world, particularly in larger communities where you have multiple public interest organizations, it's hard to get jobs. A lot of those attorneys that are hired are attorneys that have clerked for federal judges, right? So those are, it's just, that's part of the reality. The benefit of being in a smaller community is with fewer nonprofit organizations, as with anytime you have an open position, at least my experience in the law is that the pool is going to be much smaller too. So you might have a better chance of getting hired at a nonprofit organization out here. You're just not going to have as much of a network of support to develop and grow and build your expertise. So you have to be really self-taught in many ways, reach out, establish relationships with mentors, perhaps even outside of the area.
Well, that's great. We have one more question from Shoshana McKnight. There you go. Shoshana, where are you?
I'm here.
Oh, hi. Okay. Yeah, what's your question?
Yeah, well, I have a bazillion questions, but I guess I'll ask the one question that might be able to lead to that and not take forever, which is, are the panelists willing to have us contact them outside of this panel with further questions?
For sure.
I cannot answer for them, but yes, I think so. What?
I have a Facebook page. It's under my name, Kara Woodruff. If you befriend me, then we can get in touch and message that way. That'd be a good way to do it. I welcome that.
Great, thank you. If I look away, I'm looking at my other screen, so I will write that down. Great.
And I just
Great.
put my law school email in the chat box, so feel free to reach out.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll do the same. Thank you.
Great. And I have to say, as your campus dean, and you know, I'm always really interested in hearing from students and potential students and just general community members. So it's jmarks@slowlaw.org.
And
I just, as a last kind of thing, I wanted to say this is my 13th year serving as an elected official for the city of San Luis Obispo, 6 years as mayor, 6 years on city council, and now I've just been reelected for another 4 years on city council. My law degree is so important. Thank you. My law degree is so important, and not just my degree, but my education. So just in the past couple of days, I've been able to surface issues in the language of what it is that we are considering, and actually convincing my colleagues, persuading my colleagues just by raising these issues and couching a pretty good argument, you know. So I just think it's a really useful thing. It is 6:29. Somebody's got to go to law school, so I think I'm going to say goodbye and wish everyone the best luck. You're my heroes. Thanks a lot.
So
Good night.
Thanks so much. Good night, everyone.
for joining us.
Thank you for helping
Thank
out.
you to the
Bye.
panelists. Thank you to Jan, campus dean. So everyone have a good night.